Welcome to the Boomer Briefing podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. Today, I am your host, Amanda Wilkie, consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Kyle Stahlbaum. Now, hi, Kyle. I really appreciate you being on this episode of the podcast with me. So welcome.
Thanks for having me, Amanda.
Yeah. Kyle is the Director of IT at RLB, Chartered Professional Accountants. And today we're going to be talking about the strategic shift away from on-premise infrastructure and really redefining processes to allow for better growth for your firm. Now, Kyle, this is something that I know you have worked a lot with lately, and I know because you've actually presented at the Boomer Technology Circles. But we've, been having a lot of conversation about this shift from on-premise infrastructure to the cloud, which, we've been talking about the cloud for decades. Some people call it infrastructure as a service. Let's start by just defining what it is we're talking about here. When we say we're talking about going from on-premise to the cloud, how would you describe that? What is that, Kyle?
Sure. So I guess, it's not even just infrastructure as a service as well. It's also, relying on vendors too. So software as a service is now kind of, the cloud portion of things. So it's not just, hey, look, I'm going to take my old servers and my old desktops and everything and push them up into the cloud and magically everything works. It's taking a look at how you can take what your vendors are leveraging, or Azure, Microsoft, or AWS, and shifting and taking a look at what can we push up into the cloud from an infrastructure standpoint, what can we push up from a software standpoint, and what allows us to shift and ultimately start reducing costs, because it shouldn't necessarily be a lift and shift over. Because if we do a lift and shift across, you're essentially just taking what you have from an infrastructure standpoint that you have basically pushed out for the last 5 years from a cost analysis to, hey, look, each and every year it's going to start being cost the same thing, because you're just taking what you have infrastructure-wise and dumping it over to maybe Microsoft. So taking a look at it from a perspective of what do you have and what is being offered from an Azure virtual desktop environment instead of having a terminal server on premise, or what other products are out there from other vendors that will allow you to shift pieces of software over to them to start reducing costs.
Yeah. And I love the way that you're saying that. It's not just one thing. It's not just infrastructure. It's not just software. It really is shifting gears and thinking about leveraging technology differently, leveraging modern technology a little bit differently. Because you're right, it's not as easy as we just take what we've got and we put it somewhere that's more cloud-based. Kyle, tell me a little bit from your experience, what really is the impact to the internal IT team? What's the impact to IT when you start making this shift?
Well, there's a couple different layers to that. One is technically wise from the internal IT department. You have people that maybe were used to using these on-prem applications and used to being able to go, hey, look, I know what the problem is and how to solve it fairly quickly, to, okay, we've now relinquished certain aspects over to a vendor, or we've turned it into an Azure virtual desktop environment or we have APIs now being connected in as well. So there's a bit of a change in kind of technically a technical standpoint there that we need to bridge up some of our internal people to make sure that they're comfortable. It's also a shift from the internal IT infrastructure as well, or I guess individual IT, that we also need to probably bring in other people that maybe we didn't look at before, developers, analysts that are coming into the IT department that wouldn't traditionally be a part of the IT department.
Yeah, and we see that a lot, Kyle. It's as you start to leverage these more modern technologies, there's an opportunity to really upskill your current IT talent, and there's an opportunity to let them honestly play with some of these nice new shiny technologies that's out there, which can be exciting for your IT team. But as you mentioned, it also means that we need some additional skill sets. We need those developers. We may need, project managers. It's just like the talent and the skill set of IT is really changing as the technology really changes too. So that's the impact on IT. What has been the impact that you have seen on the end user, on the accountants out there?
Yeah, that's actually been, for us has been a really good positive impact. Before everybody essentially was, if they were working inside the office, they had a great experience. If they were working outside of the office, I feel like the experience was always a bit of hit or miss. So for us, we kind of changed the way that our environment works, and our in-office experience is becoming almost the exact same as when you're outside of the office. So there's no kind of gap there anymore, because no longer do you need to connect onto a VPN. You need to have specific software that is requiring you to, maybe be a little bit slower if you're sitting inside of a cafe, or if you're kind of out and about mobile. The out of office experience is with SaaS and infrastructure as a service is allowing us to have that gap between the two of them to basically be almost identical. So if they're working inside of the office, they're connecting onto those applications no longer through a VPN, or sorry, outside of the office. If they're outside of the office, they're connecting in, using things, and it's just like they were sitting inside of the office and not having to worry about there's going to be lag here or this application is going to be super slow, is because everything is no longer connected through the central application or a central office.
Yeah. I'm curious, Kyle, if that was, part of your strategy. And the reason I ask that is now we actually have, firms that are leveraging more and more remote resources, whether they are outsourcing to another country or they just have, people that they're recruiting from different cities, different states. And it's almost like there's been this shift the last couple of years, because I will say pre 2020 we always said, you know what, we can guarantee you a really, really, really good user experience if you're in the office. If you're outside of the office, there's so many different variables, there's so many things outside of our control that we can't actually guarantee the same experience. But now with this, this technology, cloud-based infrastructure, leveraging SaaS applications, now we're actually saying it's just as easy, or I should watch myself. It's not just as easy, Kyle. I'm pretty sure you would say it's not just as easy, but it is possible to leverage technology and provide a very, very similar experience out of the office. So it's almost like as the world has changed and things have shifted and we're much more mobile, we're doing a lot more remote. Now it's almost like we're looking at the remote experience first, because we know we can provide a really good experience inside the office. The exciting part, the challenging part, is doing the same thing outside of the office. So was that part of your, your thought process, or was that part of your motivation for switching to cloud-based systems?
Yeah, 100%. We wanted to have scalability, dependability, and have high impact with our staff members. Essentially, we kind of looked from this may be a little bit different than what most companies are looking at, but essentially we had our technology route and we had our people investment route, and we've kind of started blending them together. And that's allowed us to understand that, the people that are sitting on the outside are just as important as the people sitting on the inside. And if we can, level the playing field from both sides from a technology standpoint, we can start scaling to them, which will automatically start scaling for people internal.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. Again, I think we've seen this shift, and I think just the way that the world was in 2020 and 2021, it gave us that opportunity. I think the technology was there, it was available to us, but it wasn't really something that the world or the profession was really prepared for at that time. So I'm glad that we kind of had that in our back pocket. And I know a lot of firms are leveraging this type of technology to improve that end user experience. Um, all right, let's talk about some lessons learned, Kyle. Like what were the hard lessons? What are the things that you wish you would have known when you started kind of down this road?
I mean, you can plan and plan and plan and plan and plan, and something's still going to go wrong, and you're still going to have to pivot. You can plan for everything underneath the sun, but it's, there's always that, oh, that I didn't know about that, or the, oh, we forgot about this moment, or there's that one-off scenario where it's like, hey, this, we do this once a year, but nobody ever accounts for it because it's one person doing it that everybody always forgets about. So being able to be agile and pivot quickly is probably one of the most key things that I learned throughout all of this, because there's a lot of processes that are start changing when you start using different applications and you start trying to train people, that people are like, well, this is how I do it, and nobody really does it like this with me. So, learning to be agile and learning to be basically, take whatever swing you have thrown at you, taking it and adjusting is probably the biggest thing that you can learn. Planning is only the first quarter of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and the planning's the big piece of it, but truth be told, companies are doing these things. Companies are leveraging this technology so that we know it can be done, and I know a lot of technology professionals out there and technology leaders out there, they'll probably agree with you. You have to plan, plan, plan. But at the same time, I think they get energized and get excited when a curveball comes their way because it gives them the opportunity to be a little creative and figure things out. They like a challenge, so to speak.
Challenges are always fun.
Right, right, especially with technology, because it's like, oh, I'm sure I can fix that. There's a fix out there somewhere. So let's talk about where you got started, Kyle. Like, what was the first step, or where would you recommend people start if they're looking to really change their strategy from on-premise infrastructure to cloud-based infrastructure?
Using something like Microsoft Virtual Desktop is going to be an easy in for people. It allows you to utilize part of the infrastructure you already have. You're going to be connecting it in rather through Microsoft's firewall, or maybe you're going to connect it directly into the firewalls at your each location. And then it allows people to connect into it. Maybe you have some proprietary software, like a practice management software, that's maybe on premise, but you want to start looking at how can I have this access to people externally, or other different pieces of software. You basically can use the Azure Virtual Desktop environment as kind of an intro to using cloud infrastructure, and then from there, once you get kind of comfortable with it and understanding how it's working and functioning, that allows you to start realizing that there's so much more potential out there for it, and allows you to start rolling from there.
Now, and Kyle, when you say Azure Virtual Desktop, for some of our listeners who may not know what Azure is or virtual desktops, it's very similar to a terminal server or remote desktop services. So if you had an RDS server in your firm, or if you had a terminal server or any type of virtual desktop, it's very similar to that. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, it's basically taking away, like, you'd have to have farms inside of your office for certain vendors, or you're going to have some hosts that are going to be hosting that virtual environment. It's basically getting rid of the servers there, and Microsoft's now responsible for hosting your hardware. You are just responsible for hosting all of the software.
Gotcha. Yeah. And we're hearing a lot of firms actually use things like Azure Virtual Desktop for those external resources. So again, if they have contractors, if they're using offshoring, this allows you, the firm, to really control the environment and control what those people have access to, because they don't actually have a computer. They are remotely accessing a virtual computer that is hosted in Microsoft's cloud, right?
Exactly, yeah. And you can spin up, this allows you, like, let's say you're doing some outsourcing and you start off with 3 people. You can have an environment that's suitable for 3 people. If all of a sudden you decide you want to start scaling up to have, 10, 20, 30, 40, you can start scaling that environment way easier than what you could with on-premise infrastructure. Obviously, at that point, you might have to look at new hosts and doing a multitude of other different pieces. With Microsoft, it allows you to scale up and also scale down when that piece becomes needed. So if we're in the middle of tax season and there's there's a whole bunch of external consultants or that are coming in, you can scale up, and when you are done and if their contract's over with, you can easily scale down as well, helping out with costs.
So that's a really good point, Kyle, because we hear a lot. I've heard a lot. People are reluctant to go dive into infrastructure as a service, cloud-based infrastructure, because of the cost. And they say, well, if I replicate my on-premise infrastructure into a cloud, it's going to just be astronomical. It's going to cost a lot of money. But there are ways to make it a little more cost effective. And I hear that the strategy of kind of spinning up and spinning down some of these machines is one of them. So is that what you have found, or are there other ways or other places that you would recommend people look for that cost savings?
Yeah, 100%. Doing the lift and shift isn't really a viable option because the costs will balloon and go through the roof. And that will, at the end of the day, you'll be like, well, cloud doesn't make sense because I just spent, in 1 year, I just spent what I would spend normally in 5 or 10 years. It's looking at it and going, okay, are there actually going to be people working between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., for example, and going, okay, we can scale back. So Microsoft has things called runbooks, and this will allow you to scale back. There are third-party applications as well that you can stack into your Azure environments, and that will look at it and automatically start scaling for you so that if you have users pop on, it'll automatically start scaling your Azure virtual desktop environments, and that will automatically, your costs will go up, obviously. But at the same time, with those users start signing off, so you have, let's say, 30 people working from 9 to 5, and then at 5 p.m. You have half people drop off, it'll automatically scale back for you, reducing your costs.
Gotcha. So what I've heard here, Kyle, is that you truly do have to have a strategy for making this move. Like, you can't just take what you've got and throw it up into some cloud somewhere and say that we've been successful and we've done this right. You really have to think about your usage. You really have to think about the applications you have. You have to think about the amount of data that you have and where you're going to put that. So it really is a whole new way of thinking about technology within the firm and how to support the firm. So I think that's amazing. That's a lot of opportunity for our technology teams out there. So, Kyle, I can't believe this 20 minutes has gone by so incredibly quickly. So I want to thank you very much for joining me today and chatting about that shift and that really changing gears from on-premise infrastructure to cloud-based infrastructure. So, Kyle, thank you very much for being here with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And for our listeners, if you've heard something that you find interesting, I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast, because again, we release episodes every Tuesday, and we're here to help you solve that critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. So we will see you on a future episode of the Boomer Briefing podcast.